My name is Dr. Michelle Richards-Babb. I'm an associate professor in the chemistry department. And you might think, well, what does someone in chemistry know about all of these things, teaching philosophy statements and teaching portfolios? But as I've gone along in my teaching, I've gotten more and more interested in training graduate students. And my research is actually chemistry education research, so I'm kind of interested in these things. How do undergraduates learn? How do we teach them? What do graduate students do? How do graduate students learn how to teach? So I'm kind of interested in all these things, and that's how I've gotten involved in this area. So how did I get involved in teaching? I actually came here as a postdoc in it was like a long time ago. It was like 1994. So I've been here for a long time. And I came here as a postdoc, and my goal was eventually to go off and teach at some small undergraduate institution. So as a postdoc, I was applying for all of these jobs at small undergraduate institutions, and I was always like not getting the interview. And when I called and said, oh, what happened? They were like, oh, well, you like the third person on our list, and we invited the top two because they actually had teaching experience and you didn't. So I was always getting this like third person thing. So finally, I was walking along the halls in my department and I saw the chair, and I had told them many times, I want to teach. Do you have any teaching for me? Do you have any teaching for me? And and they never did. And finally, I was walking along the hall in my department, and the associate chair turned around and he said, Michelle, are you interested in teaching? I'm like, yes. And he's like, well, we have a class that we would like you to teach, but it starts in a week. And that was it. It starts in a week. It was a summer class. And then I remember I went into the chair's office, and he had the textbook for the course, and he was like, he's paging through it, and he goes, here, teach the first 10 chapters. And that was it. I want you guys to be better off than I was. I want you to have more skills, know more of the language of teaching than I had, and I want you guys to be able to get the job the first try instead of like 100 tries later. So I'm going to teach you a little bit today about improving your academic application. First, I do want to talk about teaching portfolios really quickly, and then I want to talk about teaching philosophy statements, and we'll try to work through a little bit of your teaching philosophy statement. You know how artists have portfolios, and you know how sculpturists have portfolios and architects have portfolios. You want to think of your teaching portfolio kind of like that. It's going to be a factual description of your teaching strengths and your teaching accomplishments. So you want to start gathering materials, things that you've developed for teaching. You want to start doing that now. You don't want to wait until 2 weeks before you're going to apply for a job. You want to start gathering stuff together now. So for graduate students, the teaching portfolio supports and authenticates your teaching experience above and beyond just being a teaching assistant like every other graduate student. What have you done above and beyond what other people who are teaching assistants have done? What have you done above and beyond that? Can you document it? If you have a teaching portfolio and you put that little worksheet that you developed in that teaching portfolio, you won't forget about it. Because all these little things that you do for teaching, they're really easy to forget about. Give some examples of items you would include in your teaching portfolio. What would you include? From your discipline, what would you include that you've developed?
Teaching evaluations.
Okay.
Activities you've constructed for students.
Activities that you've constructed or maybe taken from your instructor and improved upon? Okay. What would you include?
Maybe a video of your class. Record your class while you're teaching.
Okay, a video of your class, record your class as you're teaching. I do know that ministers, my sister's a Presbyterian minister, she actually has to have videos of her lectures online when she goes to apply for a job, and then they watch her videos ahead of time. Before they even offer her an interview, they watch the videos. So that's actually a pretty good idea. And sometimes when you apply for jobs, nowadays they want to see, they want you to submit a video of your teaching. Luckily, I never had to do that, but that's too complicated for me. What else? What else do you think you would include in your teaching portfolio that documents your teaching experiences?
Like a good lesson plan.
A good lesson plan that you've developed? Okay. Anything else from your teaching? Some of you teach labs. Have you ever thought of better ways of telling the students about how to do the lab? Or you give a little talk before the lab, a little pre-talk before the lab, and you have it all written out in your own handwriting. That's something you prepared. That should go in your teaching portfolio. What else? Anything else you guys can think of?
For a lecture that you've given.
Okay. So notes from a lecture that you've given. They could be handwritten. I still work from handwritten notes, or they could be PowerPoint. Yeah, all those things are things that you've worked on for teaching that could go in your teaching portfolio and should go in. Maybe you have developed something new. So, and that new thing you've developed, curriculum development you'd put in. Or maybe you have evidence of student learning in terms of, do you have copies of student tests of like an A student, a C student, and maybe a student who wasn't so good. And of course take their names off, but copies of those student tests, their responses, and maybe your feedback to the students. Have you won any awards? You would want to put that in your teaching portfolio, document that. Maybe a list of students you've advised. Maybe you have undergraduates who you have to work with and who you have to, like in chemistry, we often work with undergraduates on undergraduate research. And it's always the graduate student who gets stuck working with the undergraduate one-on-one. Well, you need to document that. How many undergraduates have you worked with? What did they do? How did you help them? What skills did you train them in? What did they do once they left you? Did they go off and go to graduate school? Well, that's a really good result. Did they go off and get a really good job in the field that you're working in? Well, that's a really good result as well. So people, undergraduates you've advised or mentored in some way, and then track them. What did they do? Keep in contact with them. Maybe a reflective statement placing items in context. Maybe you developed some new handout for the lab. Why did you develop that? Why did you feel it was needed? How was it received? So a reflective statement putting things in context. We have a faculty member who came through when he was interviewing. He's now employed in our department as a teaching assistant professor. He brought this teaching portfolio with him and showed it to me when he was in my office for his little half-hour interview. And I was really impressed by his teaching portfolio. Yeah, it's, you know, nice, it's really cool looking. He's got a nice index there. He's got tabular form on everything, Blackboard lectures, PowerPoint lectures, course handouts, tests and quizzes that he developed. I was really impressed by this, and I asked him if I could keep it and use it for these talks. So I'm going to pass this around. You can kind of look at it. This is not something that you would send in as part of your application for an academic job, but it is something you might take with you on the interview. Because what if you're interviewing and someone asks you a question about some handout you developed, and instead of just kind of qualitatively talking about it, you can whip out your teaching portfolio and say, here, look, this is what I developed. Here's how it was laid out, and you can actually show them a concrete example of something you did. So that's kind of nice to have, and it helps you to document what you've done. So if you already teach as part of your teaching assistant duties and everything's set, what else can you do? So you're a teaching assistant, the syllabus is set, everything seems to be set. And for your teaching portfolio, you need to have original stuff in there. But what can you do? What are some other things that you can do? What could you do? Is there anything that you could think of developing? How do you say things in your own words? You know, those are things you'd want to put in your teaching portfolio. So you do want to work to develop your own teaching and improve your own teaching each semester. And things that you've done to develop and improve your own teaching could go in your teaching portfolio. Eventually they'd be replaced by more complex things, but initially these are things you'd want to put in there. So maybe you could create your own handouts, your own assignments, but of course you always want to be sure to get those vetted by the course instructor and get the course instructor's approval. Sometimes you develop something and the course instructor's like, wow, this is really good. Can I use this and photocopy this and give it to the rest of my teaching assistants so they can use? You never know. And now you have something that you were the originator of and everyone's using it. That's a really cool thing, and that should go in your teaching portfolio. So you can place handwritten notes in your teaching portfolio as documentation of, you know, how you're teaching the stuff, right? And you can get written feedback on your teaching from your students. You can get written feedback from your peers if you're teaching like a recitation or something like that. Have one of your peers sit in and give you written feedback, and that could go in your teaching portfolio as documentation of, you know, that you want to learn about teaching and you want to get better at it. Have the course instructor sit in and give you written feedback if they don't already do this. This serves as evidence of your commitment to teaching and your desire to improve. How could you enhance your teaching portfolio? If you were going to start creating your own teaching portfolio, what could you do? What would you do?
For example, if you teach some classes, you can think about lesson plans and how you integrate them into
Okay, so write up your lesson plans, make them very formalized, okay, and that would go in your teaching portfolio, so something you've created. You guys are already doing something right now to add to your teaching portfolio. You've come to this workshop, right? This is something you would want to put in your teaching portfolio to say, here's ways I'm trying to improve my teaching. I've gone to this kind of career development workshop that talks about teaching portfolios and teaching philosophy statements. I am so interested in teaching. I've spent my Monday from 6 to 7 going to this thing. And that shows commitment that you really want to do this, okay? So those are some things you could do. How are teaching portfolios used? Well, you don't send them in as part of your job application packet. They're much too large, they're much too bulky. The teaching portfolio is more like a history of what you've done in terms of teaching, and you'll build on it and take little things and pull them out and put other bigger things in as you move along in your teaching career. It's a good idea to bring your teaching portfolio along on a job interview. As I said, in case you're talking to someone, you talk about something you developed, you can whip out that teaching portfolio, open it up and say, here is exactly what I'm talking about, the handout I developed. I find that very impressive that someone has documented their teaching in that way. So, and I think most people do find that kind of impressive. It serves as a reminder of everything that you've done novel in terms of your teaching, because you know what? It's really easy to forget all of the little things that you do and develop for your teaching. So start documenting it. Like what I do is I have a drawer. I have like this big file cabinet, and I have this one drawer that whenever I do something new and novel and I want to make sure I put it in my promotion and tenure file at the end of the year, I like just somehow document it, take the paper and put it in the drawer. And then at the end of the year, I pull out that big pile of papers as I'm writing up my promotion and tenure report, my, hey, this is what I did this year for West Virginia University report in teaching, service, and research. I pull out that big pile of paper and I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot that I did that. Oh, I totally forgot that I did all the, and it's like, wow, I did a lot this year. I've got it in that drawer, I'm documenting it. And some things I'm like, oh yeah, I don't need to put that I went through BRIM driver training, that's too small, right? But I developed this whole new course. I need to put that in. That's important. So you need to document these things or you just totally forget everything you've done. It provides accountability for what you've been doing with all of your time devoted to teaching. That's important. If you do get that academic job, you need to provide accountability for what have you been doing with teaching? How have you been improving it? What have you done? You need to provide that accountability. This teaching portfolio is kind of the start. Or you can use it as a model for the teaching portion of your promotion and tenure file. So the teaching portfolio eventually becomes the teaching portion of your promotion and tenure file. And you use it to improve and further develop your teaching. I mean, that's what you're interested in. So your teaching portfolio kind of documents it for you. So it's nice to start one now. I challenge you to get one started. If you do want to learn more about teaching portfolios, here's two really good references. If you are really interested in teaching, you really need to buy this book. It's like the best book ever. It's got all kinds of stuff in it about teaching. I've learned so much from this book, and I only bought it like a year ago. So Teaching at Its Best, a research-based resource for college instructors by Linda B. Nielsen. It's a great book. It's got all kinds of stuff in, like how do you grade things, how do you grade on the curve, how you assign final grades, how do you write a syllabus, how do you do all these things. This book is wonderful. And again, I have a handout with this reference in, so you can look through that. I'll give you this to pass around, okay? And but don't steal it. I need it back. I use it all the time. If you're interested in an academic job, most likely when you go to apply, they're going to want a 1 to 2 page teaching philosophy statement. And that teaching philosophy statement can kind of make or break your application, okay? So we want to talk about those. Why do you want to teach? There's another question that you want to consider when you write your teaching philosophy statement. Why do you want to teach? You're all here, so I assume you all want to teach eventually. Essentially, self-reflection is the key to writing your teaching philosophy statement. These are all questions you want to consider and maybe address in, it turns out, 1 to 2 pages usually. It's concise, right? So what is the teaching philosophy statement? Well, it communicates a job candidate's approach to teaching and learning. Essentially, what is it like to be a student in this person's classroom? What would that student experience? How would they, how would they experience it? What would they undergo? How are the disciplinary teaching and learning challenges approached? I mean, there's challenges that we have in chemistry. There's challenges that you guys have in world literature, foreign languages that are different than what we have in chemistry. You know what those challenges are. How are you going to approach those challenges? What are you going to do? What does the literature say that you should do? Have you read the literature on how to best teach in your discipline? Do you know that there is literature in your discipline on how to teach? Have you read it? Are you going to take it and apply it? Does the approach to teaching that you're indicating in your teaching philosophy statement complement that of the department? For instance, in chemistry, there's this thing called POGIL, P-O-G-I-L. It's process-oriented guided inquiry learning. And there are some institutions, usually small ones, that just love POGIL, and they want everybody to teach using that. And if you go to interview there and you don't know anything about POGIL, there's no way you're going to get the job. If you don't know anything about POGIL and you haven't researched the place beforehand and have some opinion, and if you're going there and they all use POGIL and you're not positive about it, probably you're not going to get the job. But anyway, you need to know these things. You need to know about the disciplinary teaching. What's new in your field? What are people doing? Okay. Why do you need a teaching philosophy statement? Well, 40% or more, and I think it's a lot more than 40% now, of advertised post-secondary faculty positions require a teaching philosophy statement, usually 1 to 2 pages. So you have to have one for your academic job interview. Even if you're going to apply to be like a tenure track research professor, you still need a teaching philosophy statement. It allows you to reflect on your own teaching and how you teach and why you do what you do and what guides you during teaching. So it does reflect, but come on, really, everybody has a teaching philosophy statement because they need it for that job application. That's really why you need it. Okay. What should the teaching philosophy statement include? What do you think it should include? Give me a couple things and then we'll look at a list. Give me a couple things that you think the teaching philosophy statement should include. Learning outcomes? Learning outcomes?
Some theoretical perspective.
Some theoretical perspective in terms of what? By theoretical perspective, do you mean?
Like some type of educational, research, empirical-based theory that guides teaching behaviors.
Okay, and guides how you want to teach. So some theoretical, pedagogical perspective that kind of guides how you're going to teach. Okay, so that involves reading the literature. Maybe some understanding of how students learn. Some statement about how you're going to teach to approach how you envision students learn. Okay, so these are all things you might want to think about. You might want to have in there, if you Google teaching philosophy statements, a lot of things will come up, and there's many different ways of writing these things. You want to have definitions of teaching and learning. What's your theory? What theory are you using to, discuss how students learn? How can you promote learning through the way you're going to teach? What do you believe about teaching and learning? You probably need to read about these things a little bit. What's your view of the learner relative to the view of the teacher? Who's responsible for what? As a teacher, you're responsible for X, Y, and Z. Your students as learners are responsible for A, B, and C. What's your view of these things? What are your values, your goals, your ideals that motivate you to teach? Why are you teaching? Why are you interested in teaching? What are your goals and expectations for the students? What are the objectives that you want your students to learn? Okay, what do you envision the student-teacher relationship to be like? Are you going to be the talking head? You're going to do all lecturing, or are you going to have a student-teacher relationship where you're going to do a lot of active learning? Students are going to be doing stuff, active things in class. How will you use your teaching to achieve your students' goals or the goals you have set for your students? What teaching methods are you going to use? Are you going to use active learning? Are you going to do some type of formative assessment? What summative assessments are you going to use? So this kind of educational language you might want to become familiar with. How does your student background or the class size affect how you teach? You might teach a 20-student classroom much differently than you're going to teach a 192-student classroom. All these things are important that you need to consider. Assessment. How are you going to assess your students' learning? How are you going to assess your own teaching? You need to assess your teaching. You can't just assess your students. If your students aren't doing well, whose fault is that? Is it theirs? Is it yours? Or is it a combination? You want to assess that. You want to figure out what's wrong. What could I do better to help my students learn better? How are you going to continue to develop as a teacher? What are you going to do? What's your ongoing teacher professional development? Okay. In your teaching philosophy statement, you want to kind of address many of these things to write a concise kind of narrative. And overall, you want to answer the global teaching question. What is my conception of a great teacher, and what am I doing to become one? You want to really think about these things. What is learning? Oh, learning. Anyone? Yes?
I define learning as a process of acquiring knowledge both theoretically and practically.
Process of acquiring knowledge, both theoretical and practical. That sounds great. Sounds like a great dictionary definition. I mean, something you could pull from the dictionary, right? Anyone else? Anyone else? But that is one thing you need to really think about. How do you define learning? How do you know when your students have learned? You need to somehow show the people who are reading your teaching philosophy statement that you understand what learning is. And if you do want to go to the dictionary, which I did, I went to Wikipedia and dictionary.com, here are dictionary definitions of learning. And it's essentially what the two of you just said: acquiring new or modifying, reinforcing existing knowledge, behaviors, or skills. Doesn't happen all at once, builds upon what is already known by the person, viewed as a process rather than the collection of facts, okay? The act or process of acquiring knowledge or skill. Obviously, you don't want to put the dictionary definition of learning in your teaching philosophy statement, but you need to have, show in your teaching philosophy statement that you understand what learning is. It's very important that you can show that. So that's another question you want to answer in your teaching philosophy statement. Are you going to gear your teaching towards rote learning, where rote learning is like verbatim memorization? You can't manipulate it or apply it to novel situations. Are you just going to gear your learning towards that type of learning? What if I give you these and I say memorize them? So I'm going to give you, 15 seconds. Memorize them. Don't write them down, not yet. But memorize them. Okay, your 15 seconds is up. Now, write down as many letters as you remember. All right, that's it. Time's up. How many did you get right? Did you learn anything? How many did you get right? 5. That's rote learning. That's not really the learning we want to encourage in college, right? We don't want to encourage just simple memorization. We want to encourage more meaningful learning, right? So what if an expert comes in and says, oh, well, there's a system to doing this. If you actually, every 6 letters, take them and write them vertically. So if I took them and I wrote, okay, so vertically, like V, D, W, S, K, G, and then the next ones are going to be vertical, C, V, V, O, I, R. So the expert now is telling you how to do these things. R, D, U, N, A, E. Can you see there's a system there? VCR, DVD, WU, SON, SON, Kia, okay, that's a car, right? GRE. So an expert comes in and shows you the puzzle for learning these things. Now you've learned something. And if you now know the code that the expert knows, so now you're getting something that's more meaningful, and you could do something like this. Instead of maybe memorizing it, now you could apply the code, and maybe you could memorize more of the letters than just 5, right? So you might want to say in your teaching philosophy statement something like, I don't want to just go towards rote learning with my students. When I teach, I want my students to learn stuff that's meaningful. I want them to be able to take what I've taught them and apply it to a new and novel situation to show that they've really learned the material. So you might want to talk about how you want to focus on meaningful learning. So learning that is tied and related to previous knowledge and integrated with previous learning. Learning that can be manipulated, applied to novel situations, and used in problem-solving tasks, so that they're not just memorizing, regurgitating, and forgetting. They're actually learning it for the long term. That's meaningful learning, and that's, in general, the type of learning we want our students to do in college. You might want to talk about Bloom's taxonomy and the learning levels on Bloom's taxonomy. Bloom's taxonomy is a classification of the learning outcomes that instructors set for their students. Typically, your rote learning is at the bottom of Bloom's taxonomy. Your rote learning is down here on the remembering, the understanding, or the comprehension and the knowledge. The meaningful learning comes into play when you're up here on Bloom's level, when you're trying to get your students to apply, use or diagram, when you're trying to get your students to analyze things and maybe compare and contrast. When you're trying to get them to create or synthesize things or evaluate things. Those are more higher levels of learning. So in college, we all are trying to get our students to learn at this level, so higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy. Do you know about Bloom's taxonomy? Can you talk about it? Can you maybe bring some of that into your teaching philosophy statement? Is it something you want to do? These are kind of educational terms that you need to know about, okay? So do you want to talk about rote versus meaningful? Do you want to talk about Bloom's taxonomy and those types of things? Students learn by doing, and all of those things are getting your students to do things. And you're right, students like organization. As instructors, we have to be organized. They're allowed to be disorganized because our students are really disorganized, but they are very unforgiving in disorganization in instructors. So you at least want to attempt to kind of act like you're organized. That certainly helps. So having an understanding of how students learn by doing is pretty important, and being able to express that in your teaching philosophy statement is, of course, a very good thing. How do you define teaching? So go ahead, self-reflection. This is part of your teaching philosophy statement. You want to kind of talk about how you define learning, how students learn best, and how you define teaching. What's your role as a teacher? What is teaching? Are you just going to talk at your students and expect that the information will transfer in?
For me, it's facilitating comprehension of knowledge that's already there. So your role is basically to make it easier for people who are not familiar with it.
So facilitating comprehension of knowledge. So facilitating it. So you're not, as a teacher, you're not totally responsible for it, you're saying, but you're facilitating it, making it easier for the student to learn. I like that. That's good. Teaching, if you go to the dictionary, is facilitating student learning. You didn't even have to look it up, and you guys got the definition, right? You didn't even look it up. Process of imparting knowledge of or a skill in, giving instruction, helping to learn. I like that. So in your teaching, how are you going to facilitate student learning? What teaching methods are you going to use? So think about that for a minute. And it's kind of discipline specific, right? Every discipline is a little bit different. But what teaching methods are you going to use? How are you going to facilitate your student learning? So these are questions you'd want to answer in your teaching philosophy statement. In science education, sometimes you talk about backward design. So are you going to use backward design? Are you going to delineate your learning goals and then define your learning outcomes and then develop your assessments, formative and summative? And then are you going to plan and deliver your learning experiences? And then are you going to revise them based upon feedback that you got from the students? And then the cycle just keeps on going around. Are you going to use this kind of teaching method? That's one method you might consider. Are you going to use what's called scientific teaching? I like to call it scholastic teaching. It's not just for the science disciplines. Are you going to approach teaching with the same rigor as you approach science or intellectual scholarship? And this promotes teaching as a scholarly endeavor, meaning you're going to research it. You're going to read about it. You're going to read about how students learn. You're going to read about different teaching methods in the literature. Are you going to use these methods to encourage your students to construct new knowledge, develop critical, expert ways of thinking? It involves teaching methods that have been tested, been shown to work on diverse students by the literature. And then are you going to assess their achievement formatively and summatively? If you're going to do it formatively and summatively, how are you going to do that? Is that the teaching method you're going to use? Are you going to use active learning? Active learning, students are engaged in their own learning. They're actively involved. Has students do something other than take notes? They're actually doing something, right? Think, pair, share, clicker questions, brainstorming, doing cases, problem-based learning. All of these are methods of doing active learning. And then you might want to talk about what kind of formative assessment you're going to do. Often active learning and formative assessment go hand in hand. And these kind of inform the instructor of where the students are in the process of learning and lets the instructor adjust their teaching according to what the students know and understand at that given time. Or are you going to use, I like this, it's called the 7 Principles for Good Practice in Undergraduate Education. Chickering and Gamson developed it, or came up with it in 1987. I think it was a whole committee. So are you going to use this as your pedagogical framework? Encourage student-faculty contact, that's important. Encourage cooperation among students. Students working together is good, they learn from each other. Are you going to encourage active learning and give prompt feedback? Are you going to emphasize time on task, spending time reading the text, spending time doing problems? Are you going to communicate high expectations and respect diverse talents and ways of learning? Is that the teaching method or the pedagogical framework that you're going to use? What are you going to use for your teaching? I like this pedagogical framework because it's really easy for me to understand, who doesn't have an education background. I can understand it and it makes sense to me. It's stuff that good teachers do and don't even know that it's called something, okay? How will you assess your students' learning? How are you going to assess it? We talked about formative assessment and summative assessment, right? How are you going to assess it? What's the difference? Formative assessment monitors learning while it's occurring and taking place. It's interweaved throughout the teaching process, okay? And it gives both the students and the instructor ongoing feedback. And then summative assessment is after the learning has already occurred or taken place. Now you're assessing them. So what would summative assessment, or sometimes it's called evaluation, be? What would that be? Yeah, an exam, a final exam, or like for us it's a periodic exam. That would be summative assessment because now the learning supposedly has already taken place. So you need to know about these things and maybe talk about how you're going to formatively assess your students, how you're going to summatively assess them, okay? How are you going to work to improve your teaching? Because you don't want to, in your teaching philosophy statement, you don't want to just say I'm going to come, I'm going to be the best teacher possible when I come, and I'm not going to change. So how are you going to improve your teaching? Are you going to improve it? Is it important to improve your teaching? I've been here for 20 years. I've been teaching for 20 years, and I learn something new about teaching every week, every day. I learn something new, and I'm constantly striving to improve my teaching. So how can you improve your teaching? I used to sit in on like someone who was really good at teaching, and I knew I was going to teach that class soon. I would sit in on their lectures. I would ask their permission and I would sit in. I would take notes just like a student did. I would annotate things that I thought worked and things that I thought didn't work well, and I would look at how they interacted with the students. And so that was kind of learning from a master teacher. You can do that now. And that shows that you're really interested in teaching. In your teaching philosophy, be careful of writing mechanics, pay attention to the word limits, if they have limits, pay attention to the page limits. Make sure you know the institution that you're applying for. If it's a small institution, you might want to have one teaching philosophy for that. If it's an institution where you're going to be teaching large classes, you might want to have a second one for that, because you might use different teaching methods for those two types of classes. You need to make sure your spelling is appropriate. You need to be enthusiastic about teaching. You don't want to point out student flaws and that's all you do during your teaching philosophy. You really want to be careful of these things. These are some questions you might want to consider as you're writing your teaching philosophy. They can help you think about, how to write it, how to best, come up with it. And then here's some really good references. One of them, as I said, the best one is that book. Learn about how to teach from your discipline-specific education journals. Here's a couple. I know about the chemistry ones. I searched out the ones for the others. You can search them out as well as I can.